My name is Katie McWilliams. I am a junior studying creative writing at Missouri State University, and my paper will be about Little Women, or Little Woman, the complex interplay between individual, family, and community in the classic novel and the 2019 film adaptation of Little Women. The novel Little Women, which was published in two separate volumes in the years 1868 and 1869 by Louisa May Alcott, may appear to be a simple coming-of-age story centered around four young sisters, Meg, Jo, Beth, and Amy March, living in Boston, Massachusetts during the Civil War. However, its universal themes of new beginnings, loss, and love challenge Welsh Marxist Raymond Williams's multi-faced definitions of the community, the family, and the individual from his book, Key Words, A Vocabulary of Culture and Society. The dynamic 2019 film adaptation of Little Women, directed by Greta Gerwig, also contests the ways in which these complex entities intertwine, cooperate, and thrive, as it intimately concentrates on the individual stories of the March sisters. I will be presenting four main points to explore the ways in which the classic novel and the 2019 film challenge the ideas of the community, the family, and the individual. 1. The use of symbolism to create common identity between the March sisters. 2. The institution of the family through a communal perspective and how this perspective explores the maturing relationships between the March sisters. 3. The differences between individualism and individuality and how these concepts are portrayed in each March sisters' adult experiences. And 4. The gradual coming together of the March sisters as they refocus on communal interests. According to Raymond Williams, community is, quote, the quality of holding something in common, as in community interests, community of goods, end quote. Throughout the novel, symbolism is depicted through transparent, imaginative metaphors to emphasize the common sense of anticipation and excitement the sisters share for the future. As the young sisters watch the, quote, gold and purple clouds lay on the hilltops, silvery white peaks that shine like the airy spires of some celestial city, end quote, they wistfully share their own, quote, castles in the air, end quote, a metaphor for their future dreams and aspirations. While each of them describes very different pursuits, they all share the common interest of finding long-term happiness and satisfaction in their adulthood. In contrast, Alexander Desplat, the composer of the 2019 film, creates a gentle motif, or a short, reoccurring musical theme, to develop Beth into a symbol of hope as well as a beacon of confidence during uncertain times. For example, the beginning half of the track, quote, Father Comes Home, end quote, provides the backdrop of the scene set in the past in which Mr. March makes a surprise Christmas visit after serving in the Civil War. Ambient strings play Beth's musical motif throughout the joyous reunion, which also signifies one of the final times the entire family will celebrate Christmas together. The film cuts to the present as low strings create a somber backdrop to the solo piano that plays a slower version of Beth's motif. The sisters have also gone their separate ways as young adults at this point in the film, which further builds the despondence of the moment as Jo enters the kitchen alone to comfort Marmee, who's mourning the loss of her daughter. Although the March sisters continue to be separated for a time after Beth passes away, in the novel, the girls continue to hold in common the sense of aspiration created by the vivid image of, quote, castles in the air, end quote. Many years after Beth's death, when they are all gathered to celebrate Marmee's birthday with families of their own, Amy recalls the day that they shared their, quote, castles in the air, end quote. The reflections from each of the remaining March sisters demonstrate a shared sense of maturity. For example, Jo describes her former desire to become a spinster as, quote, so selfish, lonely, and cold to me now, end quote, as she is contently surrounded by her caring husband and eager boarding school pupils. Similarly, in the film, the love for the legacy Beth leaves behind is a common interest that helps bring the March sisters back together. Throughout the film, Beth's growing enthusiasm for the piano helps her blossom out of her shy, timid nature and become a confident young woman. In one of the scenes set in the present, Jo's friend, Friedrich, asks about the lonely piano sitting in the corner of the parlor. Each March sister's facial expressions become solemn and reflective as Jo says, quote, that was our best piano. We all play a little, end quote, while Meg adds, quote, but not as well as her, end quote. Watching Friedrich play Beethoven's Meditative Piano Sonata No. 8 in C minor on the beloved instrument reminds the young women about their unending love for Beth's quiet, brave spirit, which is something they will all hold in common for the rest of their lives. Although symbolism helps create a strong bond between the March sisters, both the novel and the film demonstrate that the family is not just tied together by blood. They treat one another as members of a community because of their continual desire to look out for each other's interests. Williams describes how the term, quote, family, end quote, came to be known as a, quote, small kin group, end quote, or, more specifically, the independent households in the working and lower middle classes who were, quote, defined by wage labor, end quote, during the 19th century as progressive capitalism continued. It also evoked, quote, the strong sense of immediate and positive blood group relationships, end quote. Although Williams presents a family as a relatively self-contained unit, both the novel and film of Little Women portray the communal concept of looking out for the interests of others, both inside and outside the immediate family. The Marches share a lot of characteristics with the, quote, small kin group, end quote, that Williams describes. They are in the poor, working class, and they live in the, quote, large-scale and complex wage-earning society, end quote, of the American Civil War era, which was highly influenced by industrial capitalism's continual growth. One of the opening lines of the novel, spoken by a discontented Joe, demonstrates that, like many families, they did not have a lot to spare. Quote, Christmas won't be Christmas without any presents, end quote. However, as the girls learn to move beyond their lack of material possessions, they strengthen their overall familial bond, as well as begin to find ways to look out for the interests of others in the broader community. For example, in both the novel and the film, Marmee and the sisters give their Christmas breakfast to the Hummels, a family who suffers from even more poverty than the Marches. Each of the young girls share a new sense of thankfulness for the blessings they have while simultaneously learning the values of charity and sacrifice, which they can share with their own family as well as throughout the community. At a later point in the novel and the film, Beth visits the Hummels alone. The other girls lazily stay at home as they become less concerned about the needs of the community, which is represented by the Hummels, and their own family, which is represented by Beth and her desire to help people in need. When Beth contracts scarlet fever after treating one of the sick Hummel children, the film demonstrates that the March sisters reshift their priorities and look out for their own again. In one of the scenes set in the present, Meg, Joe, and Marmee pray by Beth's bedside during her final days of life. The film cuts back to the past to depict the faithful commitment Joe and Meg had to their family during their younger years as they do what they can to help their sister fight her illness. In the novel, after Amy writes her will while she is quarantined in Aunt March's home, she realizes that, quote, a million turquoise rings would not console her for the loss of her gentle sister, end quote. The novel further demonstrates that each of the March sisters begin to look beyond their struggles as the poor working class family while focusing on caring for one another. Although the girls maintain a close communal bond within their family during their youth, both the novel and the film demonstrate that as they mature into young women, they place more emphasis on their individual interests. In key words, Williams describes two forms of the word individual: individualism and individuality. He also describes German sociologist George Simmel's two distinctions of individualism, quote, singleness, end quote, and, quote, uniqueness, end quote. The latter is described as a, quote, qualitative, end quote, characteristic and, quote, a concept of the Romantic movement, end quote. It is perhaps fitting that the cover picture of the Norton Anthology of English Literature, The Romantic Period, displays a painting of, quote, the Bard, end quote, by John Martin. Lord Byron proudly stands on a mountaintop and draws the viewer's attention, as you can see here, solely to himself, placing less focus on the beauty of the world around him. As the March sisters enter early adulthood, the novel draws on the individualistic elements of American Romanticism, which was the primary literary movement during the Civil War that also drew similarities from English Romanticism. Attention is drawn away from the beauty of their sisterly bond as the novel elaborates on their individual accomplishments within their desired occupations, which undermine the values that once bound them together as a family. For example, while Jo is working as a governess at a boarding house in New York, the novel extensively recounts her efforts to fabricate obtrusive, violent stories to be published in the Weekly Volcano newspaper. She also hides her identity by penning the author as anonymous. In her desperate efforts to become a published writer, as well as earn some much-needed extra income, she completely ignores the morals that her wise, gentle family had instilled within her. On the other hand, the film presents the adult lives of each March sister in a straightforward manner, to evoke the concept of individuality and bring the film back to its central theme of community. According to Williams, individuality is, quote, a unique person and his indivisible membership of a group, end quote. He also describes the seeming contradiction created between individuals and the derivative of the word, quote, indivisible, end quote. The individual stresses, quote, a distinction from others, end quote, while indivisible denotes, quote, a necessary connotation, end quote. Therefore, individuality recognizes the individual and his or her accomplishments while still implying that they are part of something larger than themselves. Using a nonlinear structure to weave their past experiences with their present struggles, the film demonstrates that each of the young women strive for self-growth as they rely on the lessons they have learned from family. For example, Meg's desire is to, quote, have heaps of money so I never have to work again, end quote. In one of the scenes set in the past, she experiences the thrills of wealthy life at her friend Sally Moffat's party by wearing a frilly gown, drinking champagne, and flirting casually. The film immediately jumps back to the present as Meg, now a young wife, confesses to her husband that she has bought silk material they could not afford. She eventually sells the fabric back to Sally, realizing that sharing the love and joy she experienced in her childhood with her new family will bring more happiness to them, as well as herself, than any amount of money. Although the March sisters strive to become complete, independent young women, both the novel and the film indicate that the values they draw from each other as a family ultimately bring them back together. In the film, the audience witnesses a beautiful sight of the expanded March family celebrating Marmie's birthday at the late Aunt March's converted schoolhouse. However, the novel centers this scene around Marmie. Each March sister sits around her under a festival tree, talking about how their losses and hardships have helped them metaphorically sow seeds within their own harvests. In the final lines, Marmie begins to, quote, stretch out her arms as if to gather children and grandchildren to herself, end quote, telling her daughters that she hopes they will find the same happiness she has now in her own family. In the film, dialogue is removed as more attention is drawn to the independent actions of each March sister before they gather as a trio to deliver the birthday cake to Marmie. Meg, who loved being in the plays Jo wrote during their youth, acts out a dramatic theatrical scene with their own children. Despite her initial intentions of becoming a spinster, Jo is a classic housewife. She wears an apron and she is surrounded by eager pupils. In a way, the novel's portrayal presents Marmie as the focal of the March universe. However, the film demonstrates that the March sisters continue to explore their own interests as they look out for one another and remember the families where their journeys began. In conclusion, the novel and the 2019 film adaptation of Little Women bring both similar and different approaches to Raymond Williams' complex definitions of the community, the family, and the individual. While the novel uses more direct metaphors to represent the commonalities between Meg, Jo, Beth, and Amy, the film subtly makes one of their own a powerful symbol. A communal perspective is also presented as both the novel and the film emphasize the values of caring for other individuals both inside and outside the immediate family. Furthermore, while the novel elaborates on the experiences of the March sisters through an individualistic perspective, the film embraces individuality by depicting how each of them rely on their family to help them in their growth as young women. Finally, while the novel uses Marmie to help the March sisters refocus on the interests of one another, the film demonstrates that the young women learn to balance their individual pursuits with their overall communal needs. As each new generation adapts and reworks the timeless story of Little Women, audiences will continue to be challenged to think about and apply the ways in which the March sisters create a close communal bond as well as establish confidence in their individual abilities. Thank you.